Two teenage boys dressed in the quiet luxury of bespoke suits stand at an airport gate, tickets in hand. They are calm, polite, and on their way to a prestigious leadership summit in London. But to the gate agent, they are a threat, an anomaly, a problem to be solved. She denies them boarding with a smile as cold as the polished floor beneath their feet. What she doesn't know is that these aren't just any teenagers. They are the sons of David Vance, the CEO of the very airline she works for. One phone call is about to change everything, not just for her, but for every single passenger, every flight, and the very foundation of a billion-dollar aviation empire. This is the story of how a single act of prejudice at Gate B42 triggered a corporate meltdown and unleashed a karma so severe, no one saw it coming. The first-class lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was an oasis of curated calm amidst the roaring chaos of Terminal 4. Here, the cacophony of rolling suitcases, frantic gate announcements, and crying children was muffled into a distant, forgettable hum. Soft jazz piano notes trickled from hidden speakers, mingling with the gentle clink of crystal on marble tabletops. The air smelled of expensive leather, brewed espresso, and the subtle, clean scent of success. Seated in a pair of plush, navy blue armchairs overlooking the sprawling tarmac were Justin and Jordan Vance. At 17, they were identical twins, yet they moved through the world with distinct energies. Justin was the live wire, his leg bouncing with a nervous rhythm as he scrolled through his phone, a lock of his meticulously shaped hair falling across his brow. His gray suit was sharp, modern, a statement. He was kinetic energy barely contained. Jordan, by contrast, was a study in stillness. He nursed a glass of sparkling water, his dark eyes calmly observing the ballet of ground crews and baggage carts below. His suit was a classic charcoal, exuding an air of quiet confidence that seemed years beyond his age. Where Justin vibrated with impatience, Jordan possessed a deep well of composure. They were two sides of the same coin, a perfect, complementary whole. They were on their way to London to represent their school at the Harrison Foundation Youth Leadership Summit, an honor they had both worked relentlessly to achieve. This trip was more than just a flight. It was a stepping stone, a formal entry into the world they had been groomed for since birth. A world of influence, responsibility, and immense privilege. Flight 88 to Heathrow is still showing on time, Jordan said, his voice even and low. He gestured with his glass toward the departures board, a massive screen displaying a silent, ever-shifting list of global destinations. On time is a suggestion at JFK, Justin countered without looking up from his phone, especially with this airline. He said it with a wry smile, a familiar jab at their father's life's work. Their father was David Vance, the formidable CEO and majority shareholder of Aerovista Airlines. He was a titan of the industry, a man who had built an empire from a handful of regional carriers into a global behemoth. His name was synonymous with ruthless efficiency and unparalleled luxury in the skies. To the world, he was a headline, a stock price, a corporate legend. To Jordan and Justin, he was just dad, a demanding, often distant, but fiercely protective father who expected nothing less than excellence from his sons. This trip was a test. It was the first time they were flying internationally for such a significant event without him or their mother. Their father had arranged everything, of course. The first-class tickets, the chauffeured car to the airport, the five-star hotel waiting for them in Mayfair. From the outside, their lives were a seamless glide through a world of comfort and access. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and secure, but a cage nonetheless. They were constantly aware of the invisible bubble that separated them from the everyday struggles of the world, a bubble their father had painstakingly constructed. He'll be tracking the flight, Jordan mused, taking a slow sip of his water. You know he will. He's probably got a direct feed from the cockpit on his desktop. Justin chuckled, finally pocketing his phone. Probably. He probably has a satellite designated just for Flight 88. Vance Sat 1. He stood and stretched, the fine wool of his suit barely creasing. Come on, let's head to the gate. I want to get settled. I need to go over my opening remarks one more time. We have another 40 minutes, Jordan pointed out, ever the voice of reason. And I want to spend 30 of them on the plane, not in this waiting room. Let's go. Jordan acquiesced with a slight nod. He gathered their carry-on bags, two identical leather satchels, gifts from their father for their 17th birthday. They were understated but screamed expense to anyone who knew what to look for. As they walked through the lounge, they drew appreciative glances. Two handsome, well-dressed young black men, exuding an aura of purpose and belonging. In this space, within the protective walls of the Aerovista Zenith Lounge, they were exactly where they were supposed to be. The staff smiled warmly, addressing them by name. The bubble was intact. They exited the lounge and were immediately hit by the sensory overload of the main terminal. The volume tripled. The air grew thick with a cocktail of fast food, jet fuel, and human anxiety. Here, the bubble grew thinner, more fragile. They were no longer Jordan and Justin Vance, sons of the CEO. They were just two more faces in a sea of thousands, anonymous travelers hurrying toward their destinations. They navigated the throng with practiced ease, their polished dress shoes clicking on the linoleum. Their gate, B42, was at the far end of the concourse. As they approached, they saw the familiar navy and silver branding of Aerovista Airlines. A long queue had already formed for economy boarding, a chaotic snake of passengers wrestling with carry-ons and children. The priority lane for first and business class was, by contrast, nearly empty. At the head of the lane stood a woman at the podium. She was in her late 40s, with a severe blonde bob that looked like it had been sculpted from concrete. Her uniform was immaculate, but her expression was one of profound weariness, tinged with a sharp edge of impatience. Her name tag read, Karen Miller, Supervisor. Jordan and Justin approached the podium, their passports and first-class boarding passes in hand. The fragile bubble of their privilege was about to collide with the unyielding wall of one woman's prejudice, and in that collision, an empire would begin to tremble. Karen Miller watched the two boys approach. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, performed a swift, unconscious calculation. She took in the expensive suits, the confident posture, the leather bags. But her internal calculus wasn't processing wealth, it was processing a discrepancy. In her mind, in the narrow, rule-bound world she inhabited behind the boarding podium, something didn't add up. Young, black, first class. The combination tripped a wire in her brain, a silent alarm honed by years of accumulated biases. "Good morning," Jordan said politely, offering their documents. His smile was easy and genuine. Karen didn't return it. She took the passports and boarding passes, her fingers tapping them on the counter with a staccato rhythm of irritation. Her eyes darted from the names on the passports, Vance, Jordan, and Vance, Justin, to their faces, then back again. She scanned one boarding pass. A red light blinked on her screen, accompanied by a soft electronic beep. "There seems to be a problem with your tickets," she announced, her voice flat and devoid of any warmth. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the finality of a judge's gavel. Justin's easygoing demeanor vanished. "A problem? What kind of problem? They were booked weeks ago." "The system has flagged them for a security verification," Karen said, not looking at them, her focus entirely on her computer screen. She typed with two fingers, each keystroke a deliberate percussive tap. "Security verification?" Jordan asked, his calm starting to fray. "We came through security just fine. We have global entry. What needs to be verified?" "Sometimes the system flags tickets that are purchased with a compromised credit card or show unusual booking patterns," she explained, her tone condescending, as if instructing two children on a concept far beyond their grasp. "It's a random check, nothing to worry about if everything is legitimate." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "If everything is legitimate." Justin bristled. "Are you suggesting we used a stolen credit card?" "I'm not suggesting anything, sir," Karen said, the "sir" dripping with sarcasm. "I am telling you what the system is telling me. I need to see the credit card used to purchase these tickets." "We don't have it," Jordan said immediately. "Our father's executive assistant booked them. It was a corporate card. We don't carry it." Karen finally lifted her eyes from the screen, and the twins saw the flicker of triumph in them. It was the gotcha moment she had been working towards. "I see. Well, airline policy is very clear. If a ticket is flagged and the passenger cannot produce the card used for purchase, we cannot allow them to board. It's for fraud prevention." The line behind them was growing. A businessman in a wrinkled suit sighed audibly. A mother with a toddler tried to steer her child away from the velvet rope. The twins could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on them, the public nature of their humiliation amplifying with every passing second. "That's ridiculous," Justin's voice rose, a tremor of anger shaking it. "Our bags are checked. Our seats are assigned. You can call your corporate office. The name is Vance, Vance. The purchase will be on file." "I'm sure it will be," Karen said with a tight, dismissive smile. "But I don't have time to call the corporate office. I have a plane to board. You'll need to step aside and go to the customer service desk. They can try to sort it out for you there." "The flight leaves in 30 minutes, Justin exclaimed. "There's no way we'll get this sorted and be back in time. We have to be on this flight." "Then you should have brought the proper documentation," Karen snapped, her professional veneer cracking to reveal the raw irritation beneath. She turned her attention to the next passenger in line, a middle-aged white man. "Good morning, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" It was a clear dismissal. They had been erased. Jordan placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm. Justin was shaking with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. "Don't," Jordan murmured. "Losing your temper is what she wants." He was right. Jordan could see it in the woman's posture. This was a power play. For reasons they couldn't fathom, be it the color of their skin, their youth, or a simple, venomous desire to exercise her authority. Karen Miller had decided they were not getting on this plane. Jordan stepped back up to the podium, waiting patiently until she had finished with the other passenger. He kept his voice low and steady, a deliberate counterpoint to the storm brewing inside him. "Ma'am," he began, his tone respectful but firm. "My name is Jordan Vance. This is my brother Justin. Our father is David Vance. He is the CEO of Aerovista Airlines. I understand you have procedures, but I can assure you these tickets are not fraudulent. If you would just make one phone call to verify, we can resolve this." He had played the card, the one they were taught never to play unless absolutely necessary. He had invoked their father's name. He watched Karen's face for a sign of recognition, of dawning horror, of simple comprehension. He got none of it. Instead, Karen Miller let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cruel, ugly sound. "Oh, of course he is. The CEO. I get that one at least twice a week. Last week I had the nephew of the Sultan of Brunei. You'll have to be more original than that, sweetie. Now please, step aside. You are holding up my boarding process." The condescension, the outright disbelief, was a slap in the face more visceral than any physical blow. She didn't just doubt them, she was mocking them. She had reduced their identity to a cheap lie, a pathetic attempt to game the system. The humiliation was complete. They were stranded, falsely accused, and publicly shamed. Justin looked like he was about to explode. Jordan's own composure was hanging by a thread. He asked one last time, his voice dangerously quiet. "Are you refusing to even check?" "I am refusing to delay an international flight for two teenagers who can't follow basic airline policy," Karen said, turning her back on them to adjust a sign on the counter. "Go to customer service. That's my final word." The finality in her voice was absolute. She had built her fortress of rules and regulations, and from behind its walls, she was untouchable. In her small kingdom of Gate B42, her word was law. Justin pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling with fury. "That's it. I'm calling him." Jordan nodded, his face a grim mask. "Call him." The bubble had not just been pierced, it had been shattered. And they both knew that when their father learned of this, the shock wave would be felt far beyond the confines of this gate. The air around Gate B42 was thick with the banal rituals of departure. The drone of the final boarding call for economy class, the rustle of jackets being donned, the soft beeps as boarding passes were scanned. For everyone else, it was just another Tuesday morning flight. For Justin and Jordan Vance, it was a moment frozen in time, a crucible of indignation and helplessness. Justin's thumb hovered over the contact name in his phone. Dad. It was a direct line, a number known to only a handful of people on the planet. Using it for anything less than a life-or-death emergency was unthinkable. The consequences for crying wolf were legendary in the Vance household. But this, Justin reasoned, his heart hammering against his ribs, felt like a kind of death. A death of dignity. He pressed the call button. Jordan watched him, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Karen Miller, who was now laughing at a joke with another uniformed agent, completely oblivious to the storm she had summoned. The phone rang only once before it was answered. David Vance's voice came through the speaker, crisp and impatient, the sound of a man for whom every second was a measurable unit of currency. "Justin, this had better be important. I'm 2 minutes from walking into a board meeting." "Dad," Justin's voice cracked, and he cleared his throat, forcing it into a semblance of steadiness. "We have a problem. At JFK." The tone on the other end of the line shifted instantly. The impatience was gone, replaced by a laser-like focus. "What kind of problem? Are you hurt? Are you safe?" "We're safe. We're at the gate. B-42 for Flight 88. They won't let us board." A beat of silence. David Vance was processing. His mind, trained to analyze complex logistical and financial data at lightning speed, was now focused entirely on this one personal anomaly. "Explain," he commanded. The word was not a request. Justin quickly recounted the events, the flagged tickets, the demand for a credit card they didn't have, the supervisor's dismissive attitude. As he spoke, he could feel the temperature on the other end of the line dropping. "She accused us of fraud, Dad," Justin said, the words catching in his throat. "She laughed when Jordan told her who you were." Another silence, longer this time. It was a heavy, dangerous quiet. When David Vance spoke again, his voice was transformed. The warmth of a father was gone, replaced by the chillingly calm voice of a CEO on the verge of war. It was a voice that had made competitors tremble and seasoned executives break into a cold sweat. "What is her name, son?" Jordan, who had been listening intently, leaned in. "Her name tag says Karen Miller. She's a supervisor." "Karen Miller," David repeated, the name tasting like poison. "Put your phone on speaker, Justin. Hold it up so she can hear me." Justin did as he was told. He walked back to the podium, his steps now confident, purposeful. Jordan followed a pace behind. Karen Miller glanced up, her face clouded with annoyance at their return. "I told you two to go to customer service," she began, her voice sharp. "If you don't leave this area, I'm calling airport security." "Ma'am," Justin said, his voice steady, "there's someone who would like to speak with you." He held out the phone. From the small speaker, David Vance's voice sliced through the air of the gate, unnaturally clear and amplified by the terminal's acoustics. "This is David Vance." The simple statement had an immediate, profound effect. The other agent standing next to Karen froze mid-sentence. A few nearby passengers turned their heads. Karen herself just stared at the phone, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. The name registered, but the context was still missing. She likely assumed it was some corporate drone from a call center. "I don't have time for phone calls," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Whatever your issue is, you can file a complaint through the proper channels." "You are not listening," David's voice replied, each word a perfectly enunciated ice chip. "My name is David Vance. I am the chief executive officer of this airline. The two young men you are refusing to board are my sons." The color drained from Karen Miller's face. It happened so fast it was as if someone had pulled a plug at the base of her neck. Her skin went from a healthy pink to a pasty, sickly white. Her professionally sculpted smile dissolved into a slack-jawed mask of horror. Her eyes, which had been so full of condescending certainty, were now wide with panic. She finally truly understood. I, she stammered, her gaze darting from the phone to the twins' faces, seeing them for the first time not as a problem, but as the source of a personal cataclysm. "You will be silent now, Miss Miller," the voice from the phone commanded. "You will listen. You have, in the last 10 minutes, falsely accused my sons of fraud, publicly humiliated them, and refused to perform the simple act of due diligence. You have used your position not to provide service, but to exercise prejudice. You have become a liability to my company, a liability I'm about to liquidate." The word liquidate hung in the air, brutal and final. "Now give the phone to your gate manager," David ordered. Karen's hand trembled as she fumbled for her radio. She could barely form the words. Brenda, I need you at B-42, immediately." A moment later, another woman, Brenda Hoskins, the station manager, hurried over, her face a mask of concern. "What's going on, Karen? We're about to close the doors." Karen mutely handed Brenda the phone. It's the CEO." Brenda's eyes widened. She took the phone as if it were a live grenade. "Mr. Vance, sir? This is Brenda Hoskins, the JFK station manager. There seems to be a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Brenda." David's voice cut her off, sharp as a razor. "There is only a failure of process, a failure of training, and a failure of basic human decency, all of which has happened under your supervision. Here is what is going to happen now. You will personally escort my sons onto that aircraft. You will apologize to them for the disgraceful conduct of your staff, and you will then wait at the gate for further instructions." "Yes, sir, of course, sir. Right away." Brenda was practically bowing to the phone. She turned to the twins, her face a mess of frantic apology. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. Please come with me. We will get you on board right now." But the voice on the phone wasn't finished. "One more thing, Brenda," David said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound more menacing than any shout. "I want you to tell the captain of Flight 88 to hold his position. He is not to close the doors. He is not to communicate with air traffic control. He is not to move his aircraft 1 inch. That flight is not going anywhere, not yet." A confused silence fell over the gate area. Brenda stared at the phone, utterly bewildered. "Sir, hold the flight?" "You heard me," David Vance confirmed. "Ground it, and tell your operations center that the same order applies to Flight 104 to Los Angeles and Flight 65 to Chicago. In fact, tell them to hold every single departing Aerovista flight at this terminal. As of this moment, Aerovista's operations at JFK are officially at a standstill. Do you understand me, Brenda?" The magnitude of the order was breathtaking. It was an act of corporate harikiri, a multi-million-dollar decision made in a flash of paternal fury. Brenda looked as though she was going to faint. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The call ended. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Karen Miller stood frozen, her face ashen. She now understood that she hadn't just made a mistake. She had pulled a single thread that was about to unravel everything. The order to halt all Aerovista departures from JFK Terminal 4 was not a suggestion. It was a thunderbolt hurled from the highest echelon of corporate power. Brenda Hoskins, her face a pallid mask of disbelief, spoke frantically into her radio, her voice a strained, high-pitched squeak. Her words, relayed to the Central Operations Tower, cascaded through the system like a virus. On the tarmac, the pilot of Flight 88 to London, who had just received clearance to push back from the gate, received a curt, inexplicable order. "Hold position. I repeat, hold position. Stand by for command instruction." In the cockpit of Flight 104 to Los Angeles, the captain lowered his sunglasses in confusion. Across the terminal, pilots and first officers exchanged bewildered glances. Back at Gate B42, the world had shrunk to the space between the podium and the jet bridge. Brenda, having relayed the unthinkable command, turned to Jordan and Justin with a desperate, pleading expression. "Gentlemen, please, right this way. Your seats are waiting. Can I get you anything? Champagne? A water?" Her fawning was grotesque, a complete inversion of the contempt they had received minutes earlier. Justin felt a bitter taste rise in his throat. This apology wasn't for them, it was for their father's title. They were no longer people, but symbols of her career-ending blunder. They walked down the jet bridge, the hollow corridor echoing with their footsteps. The flight attendants at the aircraft door, who had been informed via headset of the unfolding drama, greeted them with wide, terrified eyes and surgically precise smiles. They were ushered into the first-class cabin, an enclave of cream leather and polished wood, now completely empty. The other first-class passengers were already seated, but the twins had the surreal experience of being the sole focus of the entire cabin crew. They took their seats, 2A and 2B, sinking into the soft leather. But there was no comfort, no relief. The victory felt acidic. Jordan stared out the window at the ground crew, who were standing around looking confused, their wands hanging limp by their sides. The sheer, awesome, terrifying power of their father had been unleashed, and it was a frightening thing to behold. "He didn't have to do that," Jordan said softly, more to himself than to his brother. Grounding the flights? All of them. She deserved it, Justin retorted, his anger still simmering. She deserved to see what happens when you treat people like dirt. It's not just her anymore, Justin, Jordan replied, his gaze sweeping over the terminal visible from his window. Look. The first signs of chaos were beginning to bloom. The departures board, which had been a neat, orderly list, began to flash. Next to every Aerovista flight, the green on-time text was replaced by a stark, red, delayed. A murmur went through the crowds gathered at the gates. Phones were raised. Confused questions began to ripple through the terminal. Within minutes, the first official announcement crackled over the PA system. Attention all passengers. Due to an unforeseen operational issue, all departing Aerovista flights from this terminal have been temporarily delayed. We have no further information at this time. Please remain near your gate for updates. The term operational issue was a sterile corporate euphemism for the raw paternal rage of David Vance. The murmur in the terminal swelled into a roar of frustration. Hundreds, then thousands of lives were being thrown into disarray. A bride in a wedding dress, flying to a destination wedding in Cancun, began to cry. A team of surgeons on their way to a conference in Boston stared at the board in disbelief. A family heading to Orlando for a once-in-a-lifetime vacation tried to console their wailing children. Every one of them was now a pawn in a drama they couldn't comprehend, their plans and lives held hostage by an incident at Gate B42. Back at the gate, the fallout was swift and brutal. Two men in dark, severe suits, senior executives dispatched from Aerovista's corporate headquarters in the city, arrived. They didn't run. They moved with a grim, predatory purpose. They conferred with Brenda for a moment, then approached Karen Miller. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene. The exchange was quiet, clinical, and utterly devastating. One of the men spoke to her in a low voice. Karen nodded, her body rigid. He then gestured towards a side door. A uniformed airport security officer appeared and stood by her side. Karen removed her Aerovista ID badge and placed it on the podium she had guarded so zealously. She was then escorted away, not as an employee, but as a trespasser. She didn't look back. Her career, her identity, her small kingdom, all of it had been dismantled in less than 15 minutes. Brenda Hoskins, the station manager, was also quietly told to report to the corporate office. Her face ashen, she knew she was walking towards her own execution. On board the silent, motionless 727, Jordan and Justin watched the chaos unfold through their small window. The scale of it all was beginning to sink in. Their personal humiliation had metastasized into a full-blown logistical crisis, affecting thousands of innocent people. "This is too much," Jordan whispered. Even Justin's righteous anger had begun to cool, replaced by a growing unease. He had wanted justice. He had wanted an apology. He had not wanted this. He had not wanted to be the cause of 1,000 other people's misery. An hour after the phone call, the order was finally lifted. David Vance had made his point. He had demonstrated his absolute authority in the most dramatic way imaginable. The engines of Flight 88 finally whined to life. The plane pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway, leaving behind a terminal in utter turmoil. As the aircraft ascended into the clear blue sky, banking over the Atlantic, Jordan looked down at the city shrinking below. The victory was supposed to feel sweet. Instead, it felt like they were flying away from a disaster they had created. They had won their battle at the gate, but they had a sinking feeling that their father had just started a war. A war that would be fought not on the battlefield of the airport terminal, but in the merciless court of public opinion, and the first shots were already being fired. In the 21st century, rage travels at the speed of light. The story of the shutdown at JFK did not break through traditional news channels first. It erupted on social media, a wildfire of cell phone videos, angry tweets, and frantic Facebook posts. The first spark came from a passenger at the gate opposite B42, a tech blogger named Chloe Davis, who had filmed the entire confrontation between the Vance twins and Karen Miller on her phone. She had captured it all: Karen's condescending tone, her dismissive wave, Jordan's calm but firm invocation of his father's name, and Karen's derisive laugh. She posted the 90-second clip to Twitter with a simple caption, "Unbelievable racism from Aerovista supervisor at JFK, refusing to board two young black men in first class, then laughs when they say their dad is the CEO. Aero Vista flying while black. The video exploded. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. The hashtags Justice for Vance Twins and Fire Karen Miller were trending worldwide. The court of public opinion delivered a swift and unanimous verdict. Karen Miller was a racist monster, a gatekeeping Karen of the highest order. Her face became an instant meme, a symbol of petty tyranny and bigotry. Amateur digital sleuths found her full name and social media profiles within minutes. Her Facebook page was flooded with hateful comments. Photos of her with her family, her pets, her garden were plastered across the internet, each one accompanied by vicious captions. She was no longer a person, she was a villain in a global drama. For the first 12 hours, the narrative was firmly on the side of David Vance and his sons. He was hailed as a hero, a father who had used his immense power to protect his children from a vile act of discrimination. Comments flooded Aerovista's social media pages. Finally, a CEO with a backbone. And David Vance for president. That's how you handle racism. But just as quickly as the fire of outrage had ignited, the wind began to change direction. The story of why the flights were delayed started to leak out. First from disgruntled airline employees, then from passengers who had missed crucial events. The bride in the wedding dress posted a tearful video from the terminal. Her name was Sarah. She and her fiancé had missed their connection in Miami and would not make it to their own wedding ceremony in Jamaica. Her story went viral. Let Sarah Get Married started trending. A man named Mark posted a frantic plea on Facebook. He had been on the grounded flight to Chicago. He was on his way to his father's bedside, who was in his final hours in hospice care. By the time the flight finally took off, it was too late. He received the text that his father had passed away while waiting on the tarmac. His heart-wrenching post, ending with the words, "A CEO's ego cost me my last goodbye," was shared hundreds of thousands of times. The narrative began a violent pivot. The focus shifted from Karen Miller's prejudice to David Vance's response. Was it righteous, or was it a breathtaking abuse of power? Journalists, smelling blood in the water, began to dig. They calculated the cost of the shutdown: millions in fuel, crew overtime, landing slot penalties, and passenger compensation. They interviewed aviation experts who called Vance's actions unprecedented, reckless, and an act of corporate insanity. The story was no longer about two boys being wronged. It was about a billionaire CEO who held thousands of people hostage to settle a personal score. The hero narrative crumbled, replaced by the image of an arrogant oligarch who saw the airline and its passengers as his personal property. The twins, somewhere over the Atlantic, were blissfully unaware of the inferno raging online. They landed at Heathrow to a text from their father. "A car is waiting. Go straight to the hotel. Do not speak to anyone. Do not post anything online. We have a situation." When they connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi, their phones lit up with an avalanche of notifications. They saw the video Chloe Davis had posted. They saw the initial wave of support. But then they saw the rest. They saw Sarah, the crying bride. They read Mark's post about his dying father. They saw their family name being dragged through a digital sewer, now associated not with justice, but with tyranny. The comments directed at them were now just as vicious as those aimed at Karen Miller. They were labeled entitled brats, spoiled princes, and nepo babies who cried to daddy. Their own social media profiles were found, and their photos were dissected and mocked. They too were becoming villains in the story. Jordan felt sick to his stomach. He sat on the edge of his plush hotel bed, staring at the screen, the glowing words burning into his memory. They had wanted to be recognized at the leadership summit for their intelligence and ambition. Instead, they would walk into that conference hall as infamous curiosities. The boys who had broken an airline. Justin paced the room like a caged animal. "This is insane. They're twisting it. We were the victims." "Were we?" Jordan asked quietly, his voice hollow. "We were. But then Dad made victims out of thousands of other people. What's the difference between Karen stopping us from getting on a plane and Dad stopping that man from seeing his father before he died?" The question hung in the opulent hotel room, unanswerable and devastating. The digital inferno was burning out of control. and it was consuming everyone it touched. Karen Miller, the initial villain. David Vance, the fallen hero, and the two sons, who were now trapped in the ashes of their father's scorched earth justice. The real consequences they were beginning to understand were not measured in dollars or delays, but in the irreparable damage to lives and reputations, including their own. The Aero Vista Airlines boardroom was on the 50th floor of a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper, a chamber of glass and steel designed to project an image of untouchable power. From its panoramic windows, David Vance could survey his city, his domain. But on this day, the room felt less like a throne room and more like a defendant's box. The emergency board meeting had been called less than 24 hours after the JFK incident. The members sat around the vast mahogany table, their faces grim. These were not his employees, they were his peers. Billionaire investors, retired senators, and CEOs of other Fortune 500 companies. They were the custodians of the brand, and the brand was hemorrhaging. Aerovista's stock had opened that morning down 9%. By midday, it was down 15%, wiping out over $2 billion in shareholder value. Their primary competitors, United and Delta, had wasted no time, launching aggressive ad campaigns with slogans like, "We'll get you there," "No matter who your father is." The Global Transport Workers Union, representing the pilots and ground crews, had issued a scathing press release condemning the CEO's reckless endangerment of operational stability. The digital inferno had become a real-world financial cataclysm. Harrison Croft, the lead independent director, a man with a mane of silver hair and eyes like chips of granite, began the proceedings. He didn't mince words. "David, we have a 5-alarm fire here. The PR department is in meltdown. Legal is fielding calls from a dozen class action firms. Our corporate partners are threatening to pull their contracts. We need to understand what happened, and we need to understand it now." David Vance, for the first time in his professional life, looked tired. The crisp confidence was gone, replaced by a weary defensiveness. He stood and addressed the board, his voice lacking its usual commanding timbre. He explained the story from his perspective, the call from his frantic son, the blatant racism of his employee, the primal paternal instinct to protect his children. "What would any of you have done?" he asked, his gaze sweeping the room. "An employee of my company, a supervisor no less, publicly humiliated my sons based on the color of their skin. It was a cancer, and I chose to cut it out, immediately and decisively." "You didn't cut out a cancer, David," countered a director named Eleanor Royce, a famously sharp-tongued tech billionaire. "You took a tactical nuclear weapon to a knife fight. You punished thousands of our customers. You terrified our employees. You turned a clear PR victory, firing a racist employee, into a case study of corporate overreach that will be taught in business schools for the next 50 years. My actions were a message," David insisted, his voice rising, "a message that prejudice has no home at Aerovista, that we will not tolerate it at any level, in any form." "The message the world received, David," Harrison Croft interjected calmly, "was that Aerovista Airlines is the personal plaything of a thin-skinned CEO. The message they got was from a grieving son who missed his father's death, a bride who missed her wedding. Those are the stories that are sticking, not yours." The room was silent. David had no counter-argument. He had acted as a father, not a CEO. And in doing so, he had violated the sacred, unwritten rule of the boardroom. Protect the company above all else. He had put his family before his fiduciary duty, and the consequences were catastrophic. The discussion continued for hours. Lawyers were patched in via conference call, outlining the potential legal exposure. The head of marketing presented data showing a catastrophic drop in consumer trust. It was a slow, methodical dissection of a corporate body, and David Vance was the man holding the bloody scalpel. He had built this company. Every route, every plane, every logo had been born from his vision and his relentless drive. He had weathered fuel crises, union strikes, and the threat of terrorism. But he had never faced a crisis like this, one of his own making. Finally, Harrison Croft leaned forward, his hands clasped on the polished table. "David, we have stood by you for 20 years. You have made us all a great deal of money, but the board's confidence has been shaken to its core. The market has lost faith, and we see only one way to begin to restore it. David Vance knew what was coming. He could see it in their eyes, not malice, but a cold, pragmatic necessity. He had become the liability, the cancer that now needed to be cut out. "The board is asking for your resignation," Croft said, the words landing like blows. "Effective immediately." David looked around the table at the faces of the men and women who had once been his allies. He saw no support. No one would meet his gaze. His empire had turned on him. He had a choice. He could fight. As majority shareholder, he could try to dissolve the board, wage a protracted and ugly war that would only further gut the company he loved, or he could accept the inevitable. He thought of his sons, alone in a hotel room in London, the intended beneficiaries of his scorched earth campaign. He had done it all for them, to teach a lesson to one woman, to the world. But the lesson had backfired. He had taught them that power, wielded without wisdom, destroys not only its target, but the wielder as well. With a heavy sigh that seemed to drain the last of the fight from his body, David Vance nodded slowly. "Draft the press release," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You'll have my resignation within the hour." He stood up, walked to the panoramic window, and looked out over the city. It was the same view he had looked at for 2 decades, but it was no longer his. He was a king in exile, deposed by a revolution he himself had started. The karma was as swift as it was brutal. In his attempt to control a narrative, he had lost control of everything. 1 year later, the world had mostly moved on, as it always does. The hashtags had faded, the outrage machine having found new fuel for its fires. But for the individuals at the center of the JFK meltdown, the echoes of that day were a permanent part of their lives. The ashes of David Vance's grand gesture had settled, and what remained was a landscape of quiet ruin. Karen Miller never worked in the airline industry again. Her name had become synonymous with a certain type of viral infamy. She was unemployable. After being fired, she had been forced to sell her modest home in Queens to pay her legal bills after a handful of passengers filed a frivolous but costly lawsuit against her for emotional distress. The digital mob had eventually forgotten her, but the real-world consequences had been absolute. She was last heard of working as a part-time cashier at a discount grocery store in a neighboring state, her face perpetually etched with a look of weary bitterness. She had lost everything over a 10-minute interaction, a flash of prejudice that had cost her a lifetime. Aerovista Airlines survived, but it was a wounded beast. Under a new CEO, it had launched a massive multi-million-dollar recommitment to our customers campaign. They settled the various class action lawsuits out of court for an undisclosed, but rumored to be astronomical sum. They implemented mandatory company-wide sensitivity and de-escalation training. Gate B42 at JFK was unofficially known by airline staff as Vance's Folly. The company's stock price eventually recovered, but its reputation as a premium, reliable airline was deeply tarnished. It was just another carrier now, one with a cautionary tale attached to its name. David Vance found that forced retirement was a gilded prison. He still had his immense wealth, his penthouse apartment, his collection of fine art, but the purpose that had driven him for 30 years was gone. He had been a builder, a leader, a titan. Now he was just a man who read the financial news and took long, aimless walks in Central Park. The business world, once his kingdom, now saw him as a pariah, a textbook example of how not to manage a crisis. His relationship with his sons was strained. An unspoken tension now existed between them. The knowledge that his act of fatherly protection had cost him his life's work. He had saved them from a moment of humiliation only to plunge them, and himself, into a lifetime of regret. For Jordan and Justin, the incident became the defining event of their young lives. They attended the leadership summit in London, but they moved through it like ghosts. The whispers followed them everywhere. They were the Aerovista twins, the boys whose phone call to their father had grounded an airline. Their own accomplishments were eclipsed by the shadow of the scandal. They both got into their first-choice universities, but the experience was tainted. Every time they introduced themselves, they saw a flicker of recognition in the other person's eyes. Some students admired what their father had done. Many more saw them as symbols of unchecked privilege. They learned to be wary, to keep their story to themselves. The incident had forced them out of their father's gilded cage, only to trap them in a new one, built of infamy and public perception. Jordan became more introspective, drawn to sociology and ethics, trying to understand the complex machinery of power, prejudice, and public opinion that had so violently reshaped his life. Justin, once the more impulsive of the two, became quieter, more cautious. The fiery anger he had felt at the gate had been replaced by a deep, abiding sadness for the unintended consequences of his call. One evening, sitting in their shared dorm room, Jordan looked up from a book he was reading. "Do you ever think," he asked his brother, "that we should have just gone to customer service?" Justin stared out the window for a long time before answering. "Every single day," he said softly. "We won. We got on the plane, but it feels like we lost everything else." It was the tragic, unspoken truth that now bound them together. They had been the victims of a small, ugly injustice, but the response, a tidal wave of power, meant to right that wrong, had created a landscape of larger, more complex tragedies. The gatekeeper was punished, the father was deposed, and the sons were left to navigate a world that would forever see them, not for who they were, but for the story that had consumed them. A story of power, privilege, and a hard karma that had spared no one. The story of the Vance family and Karen Miller isn't just a tale of airline drama. It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can spiral in our hyper-connected world. A single act of prejudice, met with an overwhelming show of force, created a domino effect that shattered lives, toppled an empire, and left no one unscathed. It forces us to ask difficult questions. Where is the line between justice and vengeance? How much power is too much? And in the quest to right a wrong, who pays the price for the collateral damage? The events at Gate B42 show us that in the real world, there are rarely clear-cut heroes and villains, only flawed people making consequential choices. The karma that unfolded wasn't magical. It was the logical, brutal outcome of actions and reactions. If this story made you think, please hit the like button, share it with someone who appreciates complex real-life dramas, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. What do you think? Was David Vance a hero dad or a reckless CEO? Let me know in the comments below.